There is a secret place Jesus prepared to protect his followers when the final persecution came to the world. A hidden refuge that neither governments nor technology will be able to track. An ancient promise that few Christians know, but which could be the difference between life and death in the days to come. The question many believers ask today is simple yet desperate. When chaos takes over, when cities become death traps and protective systems collapse, where exactly should we run? The answer Jesus gave 2,000 years ago still echoes through the centuries, but most people have never paid enough attention to fully understand what he meant. The truth is that Christ not only warned of the difficult times to come, but also left precise instructions on how to survive them. These weren't vague advice or abstract spiritual promises. They were specific geographic directions, divine coordinates that point to real physical locations where God has already prepared everything his children will need to weather the final storm of human history. The problem is that these instructions were given so directly that many people interpreted them as symbolism or metaphor, completely missing the practical guidance Jesus was offering to believers in the last days. When we carefully examine Christ's words recorded in the Gospels, we discover that he spoke not only of spiritual salvation, but also of physical preservation during times of tribulation. His instructions about escape were not just for the disciples of that time, but especially for the believers who would be alive when the final signs were fulfilled on earth. The escape strategy Jesus revealed follows a pattern God had already used numerous times throughout biblical history. Whenever his people needed to be protected from total destruction during periods of divine judgment on rebellious nations. This divine pattern of protection is neither accidental nor improvised. It is a carefully crafted plan that demonstrates how God always prepares paths of escape for those who trust in him, even when the entire civilization around them is collapsing. From the earliest times in Scripture, we see God guiding righteous people to specific places where they were completely safe, while terrible judgments fell upon the world around them. These places were not chosen at random, but strategically selected for their unique characteristics that made them ideal for long-term supernatural protection. What makes this revelation even more extraordinary is that Jesus not only told us where to go, but also explained exactly when to leave and how to recognize the right moment to leave everything behind. He knew that in the last days, the situation would change so rapidly that there would be no time for hesitation or lengthy preparation. Therefore, his instructions were direct and practical. When you see certain signs coming to pass, do not stop to retrieve your luggage. Do not return home to get anything. Simply run to the place I'm indicating, because that is where my protection will be waiting for you. The specific location Jesus revealed is no mystery to those who study the Scriptures carefully. He was geographically precise in his directions, mentioning physical features that anyone in the region could easily identify. But what's most impressive is that this same area had already been used by God as a protective refuge on at least 6 different occasions throughout biblical history, always with supernatural results of complete preservation for those who obeyed divine instructions. The first time we see God using this refuge strategy was when he directed Abraham to leave his homeland and go to a specific mountainous region that he would show him. Genesis 12 records how God told Abraham to leave his city, his family, and everything he knew, promising to lead him to a land where he would be safe and blessed. Abraham obeyed without question and discovered that the place God led him to was perfectly prepared to sustain him, with abundant pastures, pure springs of water, and natural protection from enemies. This was the first biblical demonstration of the principle Jesus would later apply to last-day believers. When God tells you to leave, he has already prepared your destination. The second example occurred when Isaac faced a severe famine in the land, and God specifically instructed him not to go down to Egypt as others were doing, but to stay in Gerar, a mountainous region where there would be supernatural provision. Genesis 26 tells us that while the entire region suffered from famine, Isaac planted in that land and harvested 100 times more that year than he had sown, because the Lord blessed him abundantly. While people died of famine in the cities, Isaac and his family prospered in the very place God had chosen for their protection. The third instance occurred when Jacob received divine guidance to return to the land of his ancestors, leaving Laban's house. Genesis 31 describes how God spoke to Jacob in a dream, telling him to leave that region and return to the hill country where his ancestors had found safety. Throughout the journey, God protected Jacob from his furious father-in-law and from his brother Esau, who was coming to meet him with 400 armed men. Once again, obedience to God's geographical instructions resulted in complete protection and abundant provision. The fourth example is perhaps the most dramatic of all, when God instructed Joseph to bring the entire family of Israel to Egypt during the 7 years of global famine. Genesis 47 shows how God had not only prepared Joseph to be in the right position at the right time, but also prepared a specific region in Egypt called Goshen, where the Israelites were completely protected and prospered even during the most severe global crisis in recorded history. While entire nations were starving, the family of Israel had abundant food, fertile land, and royal protection in the very place God had designated for them. The fifth instance occurred 400 years later, when Moses received precise orders to lead the entire people of Israel out of Egypt and into specific wilderness areas in the desert. Exodus 3 records how God told Moses that he would lead the people to a land flowing with milk and honey, but first they would spend 40 years being supernaturally sustained in desert areas that God had already prepared with everything they would need. For 4 decades, more than 2 million people lived in the desert with daily supplies of manna from heaven, water from rocks, clothing that never wore out, and complete protection from all enemies. The sixth example is found in the story of Ruth and Naomi. When a terrible famine struck Bethlehem, Elimelech took his family to Moab in search of food. But after 10 years of tragedy in that foreign land, God directed Naomi to return specifically to Bethlehem, because he had prepared restoration in that exact location. The book of Ruth shows how obedience to this geographical direction resulted not only in provision and protection, but also in Ruth becoming the great-grandmother of King David and a direct ancestor of Jesus Christ himself. All these examples reveal a consistent pattern. When difficult times come, God always directs his people to specific locations he has prepared in advance for their protection and provision. These are not makeshift refugees or emergency solutions. They are strategically chosen places, supernaturally equipped to sustain God's people during prolonged periods of global hardship. And in each case, those who obeyed God's geographical instructions were completely safe, while those who trusted their own plans or refused to leave familiar places faced great hardship. Now we come to the most important point. Jesus applied this same divine pattern of geographic protection to believers who would be alive during the final events of human history. In Matthew 24 verses 15 and 16, Christ gave precise instructions that follow exactly the same model God had used with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, and Naomi. He said that when believers saw the abomination of desolation in the holy place, those in Judea should immediately flee to the mountains, not to other cities, not to distant countries, not to man-made underground bunkers, but specifically to the mountainous regions God had already prepared for this purpose. The word Jesus used for mountains in the original Greek text is oros, which refers specifically to the rocky mountain ranges of the Judean region, known for their numerous natural caves, underground water sources, and wild vegetation capable of sustaining human life for long periods. These are not ice-capped mountains or inaccessible peaks, but rock formations with complete ecosystems that include freshwater, edible plants, animals for hunting, natural cave shelters, and multiple escape routes in case of rapid movement. What makes this instruction even more specific is that Jesus also explained exactly when this escape should take place. He connected the timing of the departure with a very precise prophetic event, the abomination of desolation mentioned by the prophet Daniel. This event marks the exact moment in the middle of Daniel's 70th week, when the Antichrist will reveal his true nature by desecrating the rebuilt temple in Jerusalem. It is at this point that the persecution of true believers will become so intense that remaining in cities or populated areas will be impossible. Jesus' instructions on how to leave also follow the pattern established in previous biblical examples. He told them not to return home for anything, not to stop to pack, and to leave immediately without hesitation or delay. This urgency is not due to unnecessary haste, but because timing will be critical. There will be a specific window of opportunity to escape before the persecution becomes so systematic and technologically advanced that escape becomes impossible. Luke 21 adds further detail to Jesus' instructions, explaining that those in the countryside should not return to the city, and those in the city should immediately leave for the countryside. This guidance reveals that the final refuge will not be in urban centers or densely populated areas, but in rural and wild regions where modern infrastructure is minimal, but where God can provide supernatural provision without relying on human systems that are collapsing. The book of Revelation confirms and expands on these instructions from Jesus, providing additional details on how this protection will work in practice. Revelation 12 describes a woman representing God's faithful people fleeing into the wilderness to a place prepared by God, where she will be fed for a time, times, and half a time, which is equivalent to 3.5 years, or 1,260 days. This period corresponds exactly to the second half of Daniel's 70th week, confirming that the escape occurs at the midpoint of the final tribulation. The description in Revelation 12 also reveals that this wilderness refuge will not be merely a temporary hiding place, but a place completely prepared by God for long-term sustenance. The word used for fed in the Greek text is trepho, which means nourished, cared for, and provided with everything necessary to not only survive, but thrive. This indicates that those who obey Jesus' instructions to flee will not merely be surviving in difficult conditions, but will be supernaturally cared for with divine abundance. Revelation 12 also mentions that the woman is given 2 wings of a great eagle to fly to her place of refuge. While some interpret this symbolically, other prophecy scholars suggest it may refer to God's supernatural assistance in quickly transporting large numbers of people to places of refuge, possibly through angelic phenomena or miraculous interventions that will allow rapid movement across vast distances in a short time. The most comforting aspect of Revelation 12 is that it describes the refuge as a place where the serpent, representing Satan, cannot reach the woman. This means that the protection will not only be physical against human persecution, but also spiritual against direct demonic attacks. It will be a zone of total divine protection where the forces of evil will simply have no access or power to harm those under God's covering. Practical preparation for this divine refuge doesn't require stockpiling supplies or building bunkers, but rather spiritual preparation and sensitivity to God's voice, to recognize the right time to leave. Isaiah 26:20 and 21 instructs God's people to go into their inner chambers and shut the doors behind them, hiding for a little while until God's wrath has passed. because the Lord is coming out of his place to punish the inhabitants of the earth for their wickedness. This passage suggests a period of divine isolation where the faithful will be separated and protected while judgments fall upon the corrupt world system. The prophet Jeremiah also received revelations about this final refuge in Jeremiah 31:2, where God says that the people who escaped the sword found grace in the wilderness when Israel sought rest. This prophecy points to a future time when a remnant of Israel and Gentile believers will find divine favor specifically in desert regions, far from civilization where the sword of persecution cannot reach them. The rest they will find will be not only physical but spiritual, a deep peace even in the midst of global chaos. Ezekiel 20:35 adds another dimension to this revelation, prophesying that God will bring his people into the wilderness of the nations and there enter into judgment with them face to face. This suggests that the wilderness refuge will also be a place of spiritual purification and intimate relationship with God, where believers will experience a level of divine communion not possible while immersed in the corrupt worldly system. It will be a return to the origins of faith when God's people depended completely on him for all their needs. Hosea 2:14 and 15 reveal the restorative aspect of this refuge, where God says he will draw his people and lead them into the wilderness, and there he will speak to their hearts. He will give them vineyards from that place and transform the valley of Achor into a door of hope. This prophecy indicates that the wilderness period will not only be one of protection, but of complete restoration and spiritual renewal. Believers who go through this experience will emerge stronger, purer, and more intimately connected to God than ever before. The specific duration of 1,260 days mentioned in Revelation 12 is not arbitrary, but connects with multiple biblical prophecies about the end times. Daniel 7:25 mentions a time, times, and half a time during which the saints will be delivered into the hands of the Antichrist. Daniel 12:7 repeats this period as the time needed for all these things to be fulfilled. Revelation 11:3 and 13:5 also use equivalent periods, confirming that there is a precise divine timetable for these events that cannot be altered by human circumstances. During this 1,260-day refuge, believers will not just be passively awaiting the end of the tribulation. Revelation 11 suggests that there will be a powerful prophetic ministry operating during this time, with signs, miracles, and proclamation of truth that will reach the entire world, even from these remote locations. It will be a time of great spiritual harvest, when many people around the world will turn to God upon seeing the contrast between God's protection over the faithful and the chaos that will dominate the global system. The supernatural provision God will provide during this period will follow the same pattern he used with Israel in the wilderness for 40 years. Deuteronomy 29:5 records how God kept their clothes from wearing out and their shoes from wearing out throughout their wilderness wanderings. Nehemiah 9:21 confirms that they lacked nothing during their 40 years in the wilderness. Their clothes did not wear out, and their feet did not swell. This same miraculous provision will be available to last-day believers who obey Jesus' instructions to flee. The most important thing to understand is that this divine refuge is not a backup plan or an emergency option, but God's primary strategy for preserving a faithful remnant through the final tribulation. Those who try to survive by relying on human preparations, technological bunkers, or worldly protection systems will find that these alternatives fail them when they need them most. Only those who trust completely in divine provision and protection will find true safety. The most important preparation for this refuge is not physical, but spiritual. It requires a heart willing to leave everything behind when God gives the command, a faith that trusts in divine provision more than human resources, and a spiritual sensitivity to discern God's timing for departure. Those who have developed this intimacy with God and trust in His Word will be ready when the time comes to answer His call to leave the worldly system and seek refuge in His secret places, already prepared since the foundation of the world.